Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at something truly remarkable. Just a handful of cryptic sentences, maybe a dozen lines long.
If for that, yeah.
And yet, these few lines somehow manage to contain, well, centuries of mystery. They've influenced everyone from, medieval mystics right up to the father of modern physics.
It's quite the legacy for such a short piece. Exactly. So today, we're taking on a pretty big task. We want to decode what might be the single most important text in Western esotericism, philosophy, and of course, alchemy. We're talking about the Emerald Tablet, the Tabula Smaragdina. It really is an extraordinary text. I mean, unique because it's so incredibly brief, but the density of meaning packed into every single phrase is just staggering.
Right.
And it wasn't just seen as, a source of information. For centuries, it was the central authority. People revered it as this ultimate ancient code, the secret key.
So our mission for this deep dive isn't just to, read the tablet out loud. We really want to try and uncover the whole story.
Which is quite a story.
Yeah. We want to cut through all the layers of myth and speculation.
Mm-hmm.
Try to separate the legendary artifact, this glowing emerald slab, from the historical document we actually have. We need to decode its core ideas, which can seem pretty paradoxical at first glance, and track its, frankly, bizarre journey. I mean, from 8th century Arabic manuscripts somehow jumping into Renaissance Europe and then, well, how its influence keeps popping up today. You see it everywhere, from psychology to Netflix shows.
It's got long legs. At its core, though, the tablet is what we call an axiomatic text. It presents these foundational truths, these axioms, just straight out, without really arguing for them.
Like, this is how it is.
Exactly. Take it or leave it, but this is truth.
Yeah.
And it's traditionally attributed to this, mythical figure, Hermes Trismegistus.
Ah, Hermes Trismegistus. He's a fascinating character in himself, isn't he? This blend of
The
God.
cryptic figure, yeah. He merges the Greek messenger god Hermes with the Egyptian god of wisdom, Thoth. So you get this image of ancient divine knowledge being passed down. And the absolute foundation of the entire Hermetic philosophy, this core principle of correspondence, it's all distilled into the tablet's most famous line.
Which is?
That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below.
As above, so below. You hear that phrase everywhere now.
Everywhere. And that single phrase defines the universe, in the Hermetic view, as unified, mirrored at every single conceivable scale. It suggests that, all knowledge is accessible because the laws running the cosmos, the macrocosm, are exactly the same as the laws running the individual, or even a substance in a flask, the microcosm.
It almost sounds like the ultimate cheat code for understanding everything. But okay, before we get lost in the philosophy, which is pretty dense.
It is. We have to start where the story usually starts, the legend. Because the tale of its discovery is so powerful, it basically gave the text its authority for centuries.
Right, let's talk about this myth of antiquity. For generations, the power of the Emerald Tablet wasn't just about the words, it was about the object itself. We're not talking about some dusty scroll or papyrus.
No, nothing mundane like that.
The story, the really persistent, romantic story, is that the text was literally engraved onto a slab of brilliant green emerald, a physical thing of immense, almost divine ancientness.
And that detail, the emerald, it gave the text this almost scriptural authority. It cemented it as a relic, not just, some philosophical document.
Yeah, a holy object.
Exactly. And the legend, which pretty much became the standard story throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, places its discovery in this hidden, kind of terrifying crypt, often the tomb of Hermes himself.
Dramatic.
Very. The narrative frequently puts the sage Belinus at the center. He's the Greco-Arabic version of a figure called Apollonius of Tyana. And the story goes that Belinus found this crypt, maybe hidden beneath a statue. Inside, the body of Hermes is sitting there, enthroned, maybe even holding this magnificent emerald slab with the inscription on it.
Wow. I mean, you can totally see why that story stuck. It paints this picture of the text as like a final testament, left behind from some golden age of wisdom, just waiting for the right person, the chosen one, to stumble upon it and bring it back to light.
Absolutely. And when you look at later visualizations, like that really striking 17th century engraving by Heinrich Kuhnrauch.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that one.
The image is just overwhelming, isn't it? It shows this perfect ancient artifact seemingly delivered directly from some long-lost, maybe divine civilization. It grants the text instant, unquestionable authority just by existing.
It looks ancient and important.
Precisely. It's a magnificent narrative, really compelling.
Yeah.
But unfortunately.
There's always a but with these things. There usually is. It is just that.
Yeah.
A narrative. What we actually know now, based on historical and textual evidence, completely rewrites that origin story. And this might be one of the most surprising things for people who know the legend. Okay, hit me with it. We have to state this really clearly. No Egyptian or Greek original of this text has ever been found. Ever. None.
Zero physical evidence. The tablet, as we have it, the text itself, is what scholars call a pseudepigraph.
Meaning?
Meaning it's a text falsely attributed to a famous figure from the past, in this case Hermes Trismegistus, to give it more weight and prestige. This was actually a pretty common practice back then, not necessarily seen as dishonest in the way we might view it now.
Okay, so if it wasn't dug up from a pharaoh's tomb, or Hermes' tomb, where on earth did the most revered text in Western occultism actually come from?
Well, it came from a very different environment than ancient Egypt. It emerged from the incredibly vibrant, intellectually charged atmosphere of the early Islamic world.
Wait, say that again? Islamic world.
Yes. The earliest known appearance of the text that we can definitively trace is in Arabic. It dates to the late 8th or early 9th century CE.
So like the 700s or 800s.
Exactly. And it surfaced specifically within this large encyclopedic treatise. It's titled the Kitab Sur al-Khalika, which translates to something like the Book of the Secret of Creation and the Craft of Nature.
Hold on. So the cornerstone of European Hermetic philosophy, the text everyone thought was from ancient Egypt or Greece. Its actual origin point is not Alexandria, but somewhere in the intellectual centers of the Abbasid Caliphate, like Baghdad.
That's where the evidence points. The source is more likely a library or a scholar's study in the medieval Middle East than a pyramid. It's genuinely mind-blowing when you first encounter that fact, given the history of its reception in Europe.
That is mind-blowing. It completely changes the context.
Completely. And here's where the legend and the actual history get tangled up in a really interesting way. Remember Balunus, the guy who supposedly found the tablet in the tomb? Well, the Kitab Sur al-Khalika, that Arabic encyclopedia, it's attributed to Balinus.
No way.
Yes. And it's right there in the introduction to this Arabic text that Balinus tells the famous story of finding the crypt, the body, and the emerald slab.
So the Arabic text itself contains the fictional backstory. It created its own myth.
Precisely. It's like built-in marketing for antiquity. The author, whoever they really were, packaged the philosophical text with the legendary origin story, essentially creating the myth of its own deep past right from the start.
That's actually kind of brilliant. Genius textual strategy. Because it makes sense, right? You need to anchor these maybe revolutionary ideas in some ancient respected authority like Hermes. It gives the text a weight it wouldn't have if the author just said, hey, I'm, Bob from Basra, and I had some cool ideas about cosmic unity.
Absolutely. Attribution to Hermes provided instant pedigree. But the intellectual context itself is crucial here. The Abbasid era, especially the 8th and 9th centuries, saw this incredible translation movement. Scholars were taking knowledge from Greek, Persian, Indian, Hellenistic sources, translating it into Arabic, and then synthesizing it with Islamic scholarship.
A real melting pot of ideas.
Totally. And the scholarly consensus today is that the author of the Kitab Sur al-Khalika was likely doing just that, synthesizing diverse threads, maybe pulling from Gnostic ideas, Neoplatonism, earlier Hellenistic chemical or alchemical traditions, maybe even Huronian sources. They took all these threads and wove them together into this incredibly concise summary. The result is a distinctly early medieval product of esoteric syncretism born in the Islamic world. So the text isn't so much an ancient Egyptian relic, but more like a revolutionary idea, maybe a synthesis, born in this moment of intense cross-cultural intellectual ferment, cleverly disguised as something much older. That's the picture painted by modern scholarship, yes. And moreover, we know this text became influential almost immediately within that Arabic context.
How do we know that?
Because around the same time, maybe slightly later, but still very early, a shorter, slightly different version of the Emerald Tablet appeared in another important text. This one was attributed to the hugely influential alchemist Jabir ibn Ayyan.
Jabir. He's often known in the West as Geber, right? The father of chemistry, some call him.
That's the one. Hugely important figure in the history of alchemy and chemistry. The fact that a version of the tablet shows up in the Jabirian corpus so early on tells us something significant.
What did the Jabirian version change? Was the core message different?
The core message, the as above, so below part, is still there, but the Jabirian text is noticeably shorter. It omits some of the later lines that are found in the Balinus version, particularly some of the more let's say, prescriptive or operational lines, like the instruction about separating the subtle from the gross.
Interesting. So slightly different flavors circulating early on.
Exactly. The existence of multiple early versions, or recensions, slightly varying the text, confirms a couple things. One, it was being transmitted widely pretty quickly. Two, it was immediately valued within those Arabic, esoteric, and alchemical circles. It wasn't some obscure text. It caught on fast.
What really stands out to me here is this tension between the artifact, the mythical emerald slab, and the idea itself. The text's real power seems to be less about some physical object left by the pharaohs and much more about this revolutionary concept of unity and correspondence that emerged from the dynamic intellectual life of the early Abbasid period.
I think that's a great way to put it. And that difference in origin, 8th, 9th century Arabic versus ancient Greek or Egyptian, is absolutely critical because for roughly 1,000 years, the Western scholars, the alchemists, the philosophers who revered this document, they were completely unaware of where it truly came from. They bought the myth hook, line, and sinker. Yeah, that ignorance of its real origin leads us perfectly into the next part of the story, the tablet's journey. If it started life in Arabic, how did it end up becoming this absolute centerpiece of European Renaissance philosophy and alchemy? There must have been a bridge, there was, and it was a massive cultural and linguistic bridge, the Great Translation Movement of the 12th century. This was a period when huge amounts of Arabic knowledge science, philosophy, medicine, and esoteric texts were translated into Latin primarily.
And this happened mainly in Spain, right?
Yeah.
In Toledo.
Spain was the major hub, yes, especially Toledo. You had this unique environment where Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars interacted, and European scholars gained access to the vast libraries of Arabic learning. The Emerald Tablet entered Europe as part of this wave, translated from Arabic into Latin.
So it wasn't alone. It came in with Aristotle, Avicenna, all that stuff.
Exactly. It was part of a larger intellectual transfer. The first known Latin translation is generally credited to a figure named Hugo of Santalla. This was around 1140 CE, give or take.
Okay, so mid-12th century.
Right. And crucially, the text gained immense traction and visibility because it was later incorporated into a very, very influential medieval compendium. It's a pseudo-Aristotelian work called the Secretum Secretorum, or the Secret of Secrets.
Pseudo-Aristotelian, meaning not really by Aristotle?
Correct. Attributed to Aristotle, supposedly his secret advice to Alexander the Great, but definitely not by him. However, in the Middle Ages, that attribution carried enormous weight. Getting the Emerald Tablet included in the Secretum Secretorum essentially cemented its credibility and importance in the eyes of Western scholars instantly.
Wow, that's another layer of, strategic misattribution boosting its profile. First Hermes, then Aristotle via the Secretum.
It certainly didn't hurt its reputation. So this Latin version, which became known as the Tabula Smaragdina, proliferated rapidly. Copies spread across Europe. And for centuries, Western scholars just naturally assumed, based on the backstory provided by Balanus in the text itself and the whole Hermetic tradition, that it had to be either a relic from ancient Greece or Rome, or maybe even an original Egyptian work translated into Greek or Latin long ago.
The idea that it originated in the medieval Middle East just wasn't on the radar at all.
Not really, no. It didn't fit the expected narrative of ancient wisdom.
Okay, so this belief in its deep antiquity was pretty much rock solid through the Renaissance. Alchemists swore by it. But then we get to the 17th century. The Age of Reason starts kicking in, and people begin to apply more critical thinking, historical methods to these revered ancient texts. Who was the first major figure to really cast doubt on the tablet's supposed ancient origins?
The key figure here was a giant of 17th century scholarship, the Jesuit polymath Athanasius Kircher.
Kircher, right, knew a bit about everything. Egyptology, magnetism?
Everything. In 1652, he published his massive work, Oedipus Egyptiacus. It was supposed to be this comprehensive study of hieroglyphs and ancient Egyptian culture. And as part of that, he turned his critical eye to the Emerald Tablet. He applied rigorous linguistic and historical standards.
And what did he find? Or what did he conclude?
He concluded, quite unequivocally for the time, that the tablet had to be a medieval forgery, not ancient at all.
Whoa. Why? What was his reasoning? That must have been explosive.
It was pretty devastating to its reputation among some scholars. His reasoning was twofold and quite sharp. First, he pointed out that the Latin in which the tablet was most widely circulated, the version everyone knew, was, in his words, barbaric.
Barbaric, meaning badly written.
Not exactly badly written, but barbaric in the sense of being post-classical Latin. It didn't sound like Cicero or Virgil. It sounded like medieval Latin. That linguistic style, for Kircher, indicated a much later origin, certainly not classical antiquity.
Okay, The language didn't fit the alleged time period. What was the second point?
Crucially, he noted that no classical Greek or Roman authors, none of the historians, philosophers, or even writers who claimed to be translating ancient Egyptian sources ever mentioned such a thing as an emerald tablet of Hermes. The historical record was completely silent.
That's a powerful argument from silence. If this amazing text existed in antiquity, surely someone would have mentioned it. That was precisely Kircher's point. So his verdict, medieval Latin, no classical attestation, forgery, that's a profound blow. I mean, he's essentially saying this foundational document, the bedrock of alchemy, it's probably fake.
Yeah.
Why was that critique so destructive?
Because the tablet wasn't just a text for alchemists. It was often seen as the text, the original blueprint for the great work, the magnum opus. If that foundation stone was deemed a medieval invention, not ancient wisdom passed down from Hermes, well, the entire structure of alchemy, which really relied on the prestige and authority of ancient, divinely inspired wisdom, started to look shaky.
Right. Especially coming after other critiques, like Isaac Casaubon's earlier dating of the Corpus Hermeticum itself to the early centuries CE, not primordial Egypt.
Exactly. It was part of a broader scholarly reassessment of the Hermetic tradition's claims to extreme antiquity. The whole edifice of Hermetic science, as it was understood then, began to crumble under this kind of critical scrutiny.
And the timing seems perfect, too. Because as we move into the 18th century, science itself is shifting dramatically, isn't it? Moving away from secret ancient wisdom and towards empirical observation, measurement, stuff you can actually test in a lab.
Precisely. You have the rise of modern chemistry, championed by figures like Lavoisier, Boyle, Priestley. They're focused on quantifiable experiments, elements, reactions. In that context, the Emerald Tablet, with its poetic, metaphorical language, increasingly looked, well, not like science anymore.
So it began its transition.
It transitioned almost entirely.
Yeah.
From the realm of natural philosophy and potentially practical laboratory science, it moved firmly into the realm of occultism, esotericism, purely symbolic lore. Its symbolic value definitely survived and even thrived in those circles, but its purported historical and scientific authority largely evaporated in the mainstream scientific community.
Okay, that seems like a neat historical progression. Ancient belief, Enlightenment skepticism, modern dismissal. But here's where the story gets really weird and fascinating.
You can bring him in.
I have to, because even as the Enlightenment skeptics like Kircher were dismissing the tablet as barbaric and medieval, arguably the greatest scientific mind of that entire age was privately dedicating years of his life to studying it intensely.
Sir Isaac Newton?
To Sir Isaac Newton, the man who gave us the laws of motion, universal gravitation, calculus, spent countless hours poring over alchemical texts, including the Emerald Tablet. This detail just completely messes up the tidy narrative of the purely rational scientific revolution, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. We know from his unpublished papers, which are extensive, that Newton was deeply, deeply engaged in alchemical research. He didn't see it as separate from his physics or mathematics. He saw it all as part of investigating God's creation, the underlying structure of reality.
And the Emerald Tablet was key for him.
Very key. We have his own private, meticulous English translation of the Latin text of the tablet. He likely made it around 1680 or so. It's preserved today among his, shall we say, less mainstream papers at Cambridge.
Okay, but why? If Athanasius Kircher, a respected contemporary scholar, had already raised serious doubts about its authenticity, calling it medieval, why would Newton, the genius physicist, spend his precious time translating and studying what might be a forgery? Was he trying to prove Kircher wrong? Or was the idea in the text just too compelling for him to ignore, regardless of its origin?
I suspect it was mostly the power of the idea. Newton seems less concerned with the historical provenance, whether it was genuinely ancient Egyptian or medieval, than with the actual content. He appeared to believe that the tablet contained genuine, profound wisdom, perhaps part of a Prisca theologia, an original, pure theology or natural philosophy given by God in antiquity that had been corrupted over time.
So he thought the core message was true, even if the origin story wasn't.
Possibly. He likely saw the text as a serious philosophical statement about the creation, structure, and transformation of matter. Maybe even a kind of divine instruction manual, written in code, that needed to be deciphered to truly understand the mechanics of the cosmos, the very mechanics he was trying to describe mathematically with his physics.
He treated it like a fundamental equation, essentially, a formula he hadn't quite cracked yet.
That's a good analogy. He was looking for the underlying principles, the rules governing transformation, which he believed alchemy, and particularly the tablet, held the key to.
Incredible. And it's also worth noting, right, that the actual historical puzzle confirming its true origins wasn't definitively solved when Newton was working on it, or even when Kircher was critiquing it. That confirmation came much, much later.
Much later. Kircher was right that it wasn't classical Greek or Roman, but he assumed it was a European medieval invention. The final piece of the puzzle, confirming the Arabic source, didn't fall into place until the 20th century.
The 1920s you mentioned.
Yes. Researchers like Eric J. Holmyard and Julius Ruska, working independently around the 1920s, published comprehensive studies. They identified and translated the relevant Arabic texts, specifically pinpointing the Kitab Sur al-Khalika, attributed to Balanus as the earliest known source for the full version of the tablet text.
So it took until the 20th century to finally correct centuries of misattribution and firmly establish its origins in the early Islamic intellectual world, putting the myth of the pharaonic emerald definitively to rest, at least in scholarly circles.
At least in scholarly circles, yes. The popular myth still has legs.
Okay, so now that we've traced its, frankly, wild origin story and its journey through history, let's finally get into the text itself. What does it actually say? It's famous for being concise, authoritative, and incredibly metaphorical. It really is. And it starts with this immediate, almost forceful demand for your belief. The opening lines, depending on the translation, go something like, "True it is without falsehood, certain and most true. No room for doubt there."
None. It establishes its style right away. This is declarative, it's axiomatic. You are being instructed, essentially, to accept what follows as unadulterated fundamental truth. And then, right after that strong opening, we get the absolute centerpiece, the maxim that defines the entire Hermetic tradition, the principle of correspondence. That which is above is like to that which is below, and that which is below is like to that which is above. And then it gives the purpose to accomplish the miracles of one thing.
The miracles of one thing. Okay, so the mission is clear right from the start. Understand this relationship between the big scale and the small scale, the macrocosm and microcosm, so you can achieve this miracle, create this one thing.
That's the stated goal, the creation or realization of the unus mundus, the one world or the one thing, often interpreted as the philosopher's stone, but potentially much more.
And immediately after laying out this core principle and goal, the text shifts gears.
All right.
It goes into what sounds like really beautiful, but also completely baffling elemental poetry. It does. This is probably the densest part of the text, and it's widely considered the core of the alchemical recipe hidden within it. The lines go, "Its father is the sun, its mother the moon. The wind carried it in its womb, the earth is the nurse thereof." Sun, moon, wind, earth. Sounds simple, but I'm guessing to an alchemist, these weren't just the sun in the sky or the dirt on the ground.
Not at all. To an alchemist steeped in this tradition, these are not just pretty metaphors for celestial bodies or the elements. They represent necessary components, reagents, principles, and essential process steps in the great work.
Okay, let's really try to unpack that elemental poetry then, because this seems crucial. This is where the symbolic genius of the text really seems to shine. What does the alchemical family sun and moon represent?
Right. The sun and moon are the parents of the one thing. The sun, representing the father, is the active masculine principle. It symbolizes the heating, drying, projecting, refining force. In alchemical terms, it's often equated with the element sulfur or with the metal gold. It's the initiating spark, the transformative energy.
Okay, active, fiery, masculine. What about the moon?
The moon, the mother, is the passive, feminine, receptive principle. It symbolizes moisture, coolness, the matter that receives the action of the sun. It's often equated with the element mercury, philosophical mercury, not the metal necessarily, or with silver. It represents the receptive substance, the base material that needs to be worked upon and transformed by the solar energy. So the one thing, the goal of creation, arises from this union, this chemical wedding or conjunction of these cosmic opposites. Active energy, sun sulfur, acting upon receptive matter, moon mercury. It's fundamentally a philosophy of unification. Exactly. You need both parents, both principles, for the child, the perfected substance, to be conceived and born. The reaction requires the interplay of opposites. Then the text moves on to describe how this child is nurtured and brought to maturity. It introduces the mechanism of transformation, how the active principle is transmitted and refined. Okay, that's the next line. The wind carried it in its womb. Wind. Air. Wind or air in this context represents the volatile spirit. Think vapor, sublimation, distillation. It's the process where the substance, the child, conceived by sun and moon, is heated and ascends like a spirit separating from the body. It rises as a gas, an essence of vapor. This ascending phase, being carried by the wind, is crucial for purification. The subtle essence is separated from the grosser, earthier parts.
So wind is the agent of purification through volatilization, making it rise up, and then the earth comes in. The earth is the nurse thereof.
Right. The earth represents fixation, stabilization, the final embodiment. After the volatile spirit, the essence, has been purified by ascending in the wind distillation, it must eventually be brought back down. It needs to return to the material realm, be nursed or nurtured by the earth to become embodied, fixed, and stable. This is the stage of coagulation or condensation, achieving the final, perfected, non-volatile state.
Wow. Okay, so the entire core alchemical process seems to be compressed into just those two poetic lines. You've got active force sun, passive matter moon, volatile purification, wind air ascent, and stable embodiment, earth fixation descent. That's the classical interpretation, yes. The four stages, the interplay of elements and principles, all condensed into this incredibly evocative family metaphor. It really is an incredible piece of intellectual compression.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier how the text traveled and was translated, and those translation choices started to fundamentally reshape how people, especially Europeans, approached this one thing they were trying to create. This is where we need to look really closely at the subtle but crucial difference between words like telesmi and perfection, right?
Yes, this is one of the most critical interpretive forks in the road, and it significantly affects how you understand the goal of the tablet. The earlier Latin versions, closer perhaps to the likely sense of the Arabic, stated that the one thing, once created, is the father of all telesmi of the whole world.
Telesmi, what does that mean exactly?
Telesmus, or telesmus, is a Greek word. It essentially means wonders, consecrated objects, talismans, or even magical operations or enchantments. So this phrasing suggests that the initial goal, or at least one major aspect of it, had a distinct flavor of creating something that could produce magical effects, wonders, or powerful enchanted objects, maybe closer to practical magic or theurgy.
Okay, so a bit more overtly magical in the early understanding. But Newton's translation, which you said became hugely influential, changed that focus quite dramatically, hugely. Newton, in his private translation, rendered that line very differently. He wrote, "The father of all perfection in the whole world is here," or sometimes translated as, "Its power is integral if it be turned into earth." He focuses on perfection and power integrity, from wondrous talismans to perfection. Why is that shift so significant?
Well, think about the context. In the 17th century, alchemy was under pressure, trying to maintain its scientific credibility in the face of rising mechanism and skepticism. Translating the ultimate result as perfection, implying the creation of a pure, incorruptible, ultimate substance, the absolute refinement of matter aligned the goal of the tablet much more closely with philosophical and, arguably, chemical ideals. It aimed for the mastery and ultimate purification of nature, rather than something that sounded like superstition or mere magic charm-making.
So Newton, whether he did it consciously to dignify alchemy or just because that's how he understood the goal, steered the interpretation toward a more philosophical, maybe even scientific endpoint. He focused the text almost entirely on creating the philosopher's stone as the ultimate perfect substance rather than, say, an occult power source.
Precisely. This focus on achieving chemical or metaphysical perfection gave the work a different kind of mandate, perhaps one more palatable to a mind like Newton's. And there's another crucial difference in translation that affects how the text is read, particularly in the later operational part. This involves whether the text is describing something or commanding something.
Okay, explain that.
The Arabic original and some of the early Latin versions seem to be more descriptive. They talk about what the perfected one thing does. For example, one passage might say, "If this substance be cast upon earth, it will separate the element of earth from that of fire, the subtle from the gross." It's describing the inherent power or property of the substance itself.
Okay, so the substance has this separating power. But the later Latin Vulgate, the common version, and especially Newton's translation, turned this descriptive passage into a direct command to the alchemist. Yes, the shift to the imperative mood is profound. The widely known Latin version says, "Separabis terram abigne, satalia spiso," which translates as, "Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross." Newton followed this imperative phrasing. "Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly with great industry." Whoa, that changes everything. It goes from, here's what this amazing stuff does, to, here's what you must do. It becomes an instruction manual.
Exactly. It transforms the text from a piece of cosmology or a description of a powerful substance into a direct set of instructions for the alchemist working in the lab. It even includes advice on technique sweetly, meaning gently or gradually, and with great industry, implying patience and skillful effort. It told the reader, you, the operator, must perform this difficult separation.
That's a huge psychological shift for the person reading it, the practitioner. It makes the tablet feel much more like a hands-on recipe, not just abstract philosophy. Absolutely. It empowers the alchemist as the agent of transformation. And the ultimate payoff, the grand promise for successfully executing this work, whether you interpret it as happening in the laboratory flask or within the alchemist's own soul, is immense. The text culminates with this promise. Thus thou wilt possess the glory of the whole world, and all obscurity will fly far from thee. The glory of the whole world. That sounds like more than just making gold.
Much more. It implies achieving gnosis, profound, intuitive knowledge. Total enlightenment. Some interpretations use the term pansophia, meaning universal wisdom. It suggests not just material wealth from transmutation, but complete mastery over nature, understanding of all secrets, and the total banishment of all darkness, ignorance, and limitation. That's the grand prize at the end of the great work described in the tablet.
Yeah, that ultimate promise, possessing the glory of the whole world, really leads us straight into the deeper metaphysical significance of the tablet.
Yeah.
Why did this text resonate so strongly for so long, even surviving centuries of skepticism about its origins? I think it's because it offered a complete foundational worldview, and crucially, an anti-dualistic one.
Anti-dualistic meaning it doesn't see the world as split into opposing forces, like spirit versus matter,
Sure.
exactly. The core engine driving that worldview is the principle of correspondence. As above, so below. Right, that's the key. It means that spirit and matter aren't fundamentally separate or at odds. They are intimately linked, reflecting each other, mirroring each other across all levels of reality. This perspective had huge implications for almost every branch of thought back then. If you study the microcosm, whether that's the human being, a plant, or a substance in your alchemical vessel, you are simultaneously gaining insight into the macrocosm, the structure and workings of the entire universe, and vice versa.
Okay, I can see how that directly connects to something like astrology, right? Where patterns in the heavens, the above, are seen to directly influence events on Earth, the below. But how does this link up with older philosophical ideas, like monism? You mentioned that earlier.
The text speaks very explicitly about this monistic idea. It says that all things arise from one or by the mediation of one. This connects the tablet very deeply to philosophical traditions like Neoplatonism and maybe even some Gnostic cosmologies, which were influential in the milieu where the text likely originated. In this monistic view, the incredible diversity of the universe, every element, every plant, every animal, every star, every spirit isn't fundamentally separate. It's all just an unfolding, an emanation, a differentiation of one single underlying divine substance or principle, the prima materia.
Okay, wait, let's pause on that term, prima materia. We can't just throw that around like everyone knows what it means. Let's break it down a bit.
Good point. Absolutely essential term. Prima materia literally translates to first matter, but it's crucial to understand it's not a specific physical substance that you can just dig up, like lead or sulfur. It's more like the concept of undifferentiated primordial potentiality. It's the raw stuff of creation before it takes form, before it differentiates into the specific elements and substances we see around us. It's pure potential, the womb of all things.
So the tablet is suggesting that this mysterious one thing that the alchemist is trying to create or find is related to this prima materia.
Exactly. The idea is that by finding, isolating, and working with the one thing, which is often interpreted as the purified essence, the seed, the philosophical mercury hidden within ordinary matter, you are essentially accessing the underlying unity, the prima materia hidden behind all the diversity of creation. You're tapping into the source code, so to speak.
So the alchemical goal, then, isn't just making gold from lead. It's more profound. It's like trying to reverse the process of cosmic creation in the microcosm of the flask, taking differentiated, fallen matter and returning it to its pure, unified potential state.
That's a very common interpretation, yes. Purifying matter back to its original, perfect, unified essence. And the speaker in the text, the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, validates his authority to teach this profound secret by making a big claim. He boasts near the end that he holds 3 parts of the philosophy of the whole world.
Ah, right. The famous 3 parts of wisdom attributed to Hermes. The 3 core disciplines traditionally associated with Hermeticism, yes. They're usually interpreted as, first, alchemy, which is seen as the mastery of the transformation of matter, but also implicitly the transformation of the self. Okay, alchemy is 1.
Second, astrology, which is the mastery and understanding of celestial patterns, cosmic cycles, and their influence, the as above part of the equation.
Got it. Alchemy, astrology.
And third, theurgy, This is a term that basically means divine work or divine magic. It involves practices aimed at invoking or communicating with higher intelligences or operating with divine power, harnessing the spiritual forces of the cosmos.
Alchemy, astrology, theurgy, the whole package.
The whole package. So by presenting the Emerald Tablet as the key to understanding at least one of these alchemy, the transformation of the below the text implicitly claims authority over all three domains. It positions itself as the ultimate user manual for understanding and operating within the entire cosmos, material and spiritual.
Okay, so that's the huge philosophical framework, unity, correspondence, transformation. But if the philosophy is the why, the tablet also very clearly served as the essential practical blueprint, the how-to for the alchemical great work itself, the magnum opus.
Oh, absolutely. It was non-negotiable for centuries. If you were a serious alchemist writing a treatise in medieval or Renaissance Europe, you pretty much had to reference the Emerald Tablet. You had to show how your specific methods, your recipes, your procedures somehow aligned with or fulfilled the veiled instructions given in the tablet. It was universally accepted as the ultimate, albeit coded, recipe for achieving the Philosopher's Stone.
And the central physical process it seems to describe, we touched on this with the wind and earth, is one of constant cyclical movement, right? This ascending and descending. Yes, that line is key. It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again, it descends to the earth. This is the classic description of the core alchemical concept known as solve et coagula. Solve et coagula. Okay, another jargon alert. Let's break that down conversationally.
Right. Solve means dissolve or loosen. It represents the process of breaking down the starting material, dissolving its structure, separating its components, often through heat or solvents, making it volatile, making it ascend. That's the ascending from earth to heaven part.
Okay, breaking down, dissolving, rising up. And coagula.
Coagula means coagulate or bind together, fix. It represents the recombination phase, taking the purified, separated components, the subtle essence that ascended, and bringing them back together, fixing them into a new, stable, perfected form. That's the descending back to earth part.
So the tablet is literally describing this cycle of dissolution and recombination, breaking down and building back up over and over.
Precisely. And crucially, this isn't just an abstract idea. It directly mirrors the actual physical processes happening in the alchemist's laboratory equipment.
How so?
Well, think about distillation in a closed vessel, like an alembic or a pelican flask. When you gently heat the matter, the earth, at the bottom of the flask, the volatile components, the spirit, vaporize and rise up. They ascend to heaven. When this hot vapor hits the cooler upper part of the vessel, the heaven of the flask, it condenses back into liquid droplets. It descends back to earth. These droplets then run back down to the bottom where they are heated and vaporize again.
Ah, so it's a continuous cycle inside the flask. Evaporation, condensation, refluxing.
Exactly. This continuous cycle of heating, evaporation, rising, cooling, condensation, and descending, this perpetual motion of salt dissolving into vapor, and coagula, condensing back to liquid solid, was seen as the essential operation. The idea was that with each cycle, the substance became more purified, more refined, leaving the impurities, the gross, behind, until finally the perfected substance, the stone, was achieved.
So alchemists weren't just reading this line metaphorically. They actually designed their equipment, things like the Athanor furnace for constant gentle heat, or the pelican flask, which has tubes looping the condensate back down, specifically to maintain this perpetual circulatory process, this constant ascending and descending to achieve this continuous purification described in the tablet.
They absolutely did. The design of the apparatus was often intended to mimic this cosmic cycle described in the text, and later commentators absolutely reinforced this literal, practical reading. You have figures like Hortulanus, writing in the 14th century, who produced these extensive line-by-line commentaries on the tablet. They treated it explicitly as a sequential set of instructions for laboratory work.
So Hortulanus would read, "Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross," and explain exactly what that meant in terms of careful heating, distillation techniques, and how to manage the fire to separate the desired volatile essence, the subtle, from the non-volatile residue, the gross dross.
Precisely. They saw it as precise, albeit veiled, practical advice for manipulating substances in the quest for the stone. They equated the one thing with the prima materia found in a specific substance, and the tablet was the step-by-step guide to extracting and perfecting it.
But as we keep coming back to, the real genius of this text, and maybe why it endured, lies in its inherent non-dualism, its ability to operate on multiple levels simultaneously. It wasn't just a lab manual. It functions just as powerfully as a guide for psychological and spiritual transformation, right?
It absolutely has to, because of that foundational principle of correspondence, as above, so below. If the processes in the flask mirror the cosmos, they must also mirror the inner world of the alchemist, the microcosm of the human soul.
So for a spiritual alchemist reading, separate the subtle from the gross. What did that mean? It meant the inner work, separating their own gross aspects, their base desires, their vices, their raw, untamed emotions, their ignorance of the prima materia of the unrefined self from their subtle aspects. Their divine spark, their spirit, their inner truth, their connection to the divine above. Okay, so the purification in the flask is mirrored by the purification of the soul. What about the ascending and descending?
The ascent from earth to heaven becomes the mystical ascent of the soul towards illumination, towards understanding, towards union with the divine, or the higher self, rising above the mundane.
And the descent. That sounds less appealing spiritually.
But it's crucial. The descent back to earth represents the necessary return. It's the act of bringing that newfound spiritual enlightenment, that purified consciousness, back down and integrating it into the material world, into daily life, manifesting the spiritual gains in practical reality, grounding the illumination. You can't just stay floating in heaven.
So the work in the flask becomes a perfect, tangible symbol, a mirror, for the parallel work happening within the alchemist's own psyche and spirit. Both processes, the outer and the inner, are aimed at achieving that ultimate perfection, that glory of the whole world promised by the text, which, in the inner sense, means achieving pansophia, total self-knowledge, integration, and spiritual mastery.
Exactly. You can almost say the Emerald Tablet is the ultimate self-help manual, cleverly disguised as a chemistry recipe from a mythical sage. And the fact that this incredibly brief, anonymous text, misattributed for over 1,000 years, can make that seamless transition from being read as a physical recipe for gold to a profound guide for spiritual purification, and then even later be reinterpreted as a foundational document for modern depth psychology. Well, that just speaks volumes about its incredible symbolic power and adaptability. Its legacy stretches far, far beyond the medieval laboratory or the Renaissance philosopher's study.
Okay, let's trace that continuing legacy then. After the decline of operative alchemy, where do we see its specific principles really getting picked up and integrated into major modern esoteric movements? Where does it surface next?
Well, one of the first major places is the Rosicrucian movement that emerged in the early 17th century.
The Rosicrucians, right.
Oh, yeah.
With their mysterious manifestos, the Fama Fraternitatis, calling for a universal reformation of knowledge.
Exactly. Rosicrucianism was deeply steeped in Hermetic philosophy and alchemy, and they absolutely absorbed the Emerald Tablet's principles right from the get-go. They saw it as fundamental. A key figure here is Michael Mayer, a German physician and alchemist who was closely associated with the Rosicrucian buzz. In 1618, he published a truly remarkable work called Atalanta Fugiens.
Atalanta Fugiens, that's the one with the emblems and the music.
That's it. It's an emblem book containing 50 intricate engravings, each accompanied by a verse and a short musical fugue. The whole thing is designed as a complex multimedia key to unlocking alchemical secrets.
And how does it connect to the tablet?
Many of Mayer's emblems provide direct visual interpretations or commentaries on specific lines from the Emerald Tablet. For instance, there are famous emblems clearly illustrating the line, "The wind carried it in its womb," often showing figures capturing wind or air. Another emblem directly addresses, "The earth is its nurse," depicting a nurturing earth figure. This shows that the Rosicrucians treated the tablet not just as a text, but as a fundamental symbolic code, a key for understanding both the secrets of nature and the basis for their desired spiritual and societal transformation.
So the Rosicrucians embedded it visually and musically. Where does it pop up next in a big way? Jumping forward a bit.
Well, a huge moment for its popularization comes in the late 19th century, primarily through the Theosophical movement.
Helena Blavatsky and Theosophy.
Exactly. Helena P. Blavatsky, in her massive, incredibly influential work, The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888, repeatedly referenced the Emerald Tablet and its core maxims. She essentially took the tablet's principles, especially correspondence, and cemented them as universal cosmic laws for a huge, burgeoning, modern occult readership.
How did she frame it?
She treated the tablet as this incredibly ancient, concise repository of universal truth, part of the perennial wisdom underlying all religions and philosophies. She specifically aligned the one thing mentioned in the tablet with concepts from Eastern philosophy, particularly the Hindu concept of Akasha, or what she sometimes called the astral light, this primordial, subtle energy field from which everything manifests. Theosophy was instrumental in taking the tablet's ideas, stripping them somewhat from their purely Western alchemical context, and presenting them as universal spiritual laws to a global audience. It ensured that as above, so below became a household phrase in the broader spiritual marketplace that was emerging.
Okay, so Theosophy broadcasts it widely.
Yes.
This then leads pretty directly into the early 20th century, where these Hermetic concepts get even more distilled and formalized for easier consumption, right?
Absolutely. A key text here is the Kybalion, published anonymously in 1908, but attributed cryptically to 3 initiates.
Ah, the Kybalion. Still incredibly popular in New Age and occult circles today.
Hugely popular. And what the Kybalion did was take the core ideas floating around in Hermeticism and Theosophy, heavily influenced by the Emerald Tablet, and organize them very neatly into 7 Hermetic principles. The principle of correspondence, as above, so below, is explicitly one of those 7 foundational principles.
So it formalized it, made it systematic.
Exactly. It took the dense, poetic, often obscure language of the original tablet and texts like it, and distilled it down into these accessible, almost modern-sounding laws of the universe. This made the core Hermetic ideas, especially correspondence, perfect for the burgeoning New Thought and self-help movements of the 20th century. It further removed the ideas from their specific historical Arabic alchemical context and made them feel like timeless, universal, psychological, or spiritual principles.
But maybe the most surprising or perhaps validating reinterpretation came not from occultism, but from the field of academic psychology, thanks to Carl Jung.
Carl Jung, yes. Jung was absolutely fascinated by alchemy. He spent years studying obscure alchemical texts and manuscripts, not because he wanted to make gold, but because he saw something profound happening in them psychologically.
What did he see?
In his seminal works, like Psychology and Alchemy, Jung argued that the medieval alchemists weren't just performing chemical experiments, or if they were simultaneously and perhaps unconsciously projecting their own inner psychic processes onto the matter in their flasks. He saw the entire alchemical process described in texts like the Emerald Tablet as a powerful symbolic language for the journey of psychological transformation, which he called individuation.
Okay, individuation. How does that map onto the alchemical steps from the tablet, like separating subtle from gross or ascending and descending?
It maps incredibly well, which is what fascinated Jung. Individuation, for Jung, is the lifelong psychological process of becoming whole, of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche to realize the unique self. He saw the alchemist's starting material, the chaotic prima materia, as symbolizing the raw, undifferentiated, unconscious state of the psyche at the beginning of the work.
Okay, this psychic raw material.
Then the difficult alchemical process of separating the subtle spirit essence from the gross dross impurity mirrored the psychological work of differentiating consciousness from the unconscious, recognizing and integrating the shadow aspects of the self, separating valuable insights from raw, potentially destructive impulses.
And the ascending and descending. The ascent to heaven symbolized bringing unconscious contents up into the light of consciousness, gaining insight, understanding archetypal patterns. The descent back to earth symbolized the crucial step of integrating those insights back into lived experience, grounding the spiritual or psychological gains in the reality of one's personality and life. The whole cyclical process of solve et coagula mirrored the psychic journey, breaking down old structures, dissolving rigid ego boundaries, solve, and then recombining the elements into a more integrated, conscious, whole self coagulate. So Jung basically universalized the Emerald Tablet. He took the quest for the Philosopher's Stone and reframed it as the universal human quest for psychological wholeness, for the integrated self.
Precisely. He saw the alchemists as early psychologists of the unconscious, expressing their inner work through the symbolic language of chemical transformation. He gave the tablet and alchemy in general a profound modern relevance, seeing it as a timeless map of the human psyche's journey towards integration.
That's an amazing bridge from medieval alchemy to modern psychology. So the chemical transformation becomes the psychological transformation. That really feels like the perfect modern non-dual reading of the text's core message.
It resonates very strongly.
And beyond these more, let's say, serious esoteric or academic applications, the legacy of the tablet is now just, well, it's pervasive in popular culture, sometimes in really obvious ways, sometimes much more subtly, even in places you might not expect.
It's absolutely everywhere, often unacknowledged, precisely because the core idea, correspondence, interconnectedness, transformation is so simple, so archetypal, and so resonant. You mentioned Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist.
Yeah, the global mega bestseller from 1988.
That novel relies almost entirely on the Emerald Tablet's mythos, philosophy, and structure. The whole story of Santiago the shepherd boy seeking his personal legend is essentially an accessible narrative retelling of the Hermetic quest for the masterwork, guided by the principles of cosmic unity, omens, correspondence, and inner transformation described poetically in the tablet. Millions upon millions of readers encountered core Hermetic ideas through that book, probably without ever knowing the name Hermes Trismegistus or the tablet's actual history.
It really brought the ideas to the mainstream. And in visual media, like film and TV, these concepts have been woven right into the fabric of contemporary storytelling, haven't they?
Definitely. You mentioned Netflix earlier. Take the really complex, mind-bending German sci-fi series, Dark.
Oh, brilliant show. Very confusing, but brilliant.
Very confusing. A central element driving the plot is this secret society operating across time, whose motto and guiding principle is Sic mundus creatus est.
Which means?
Thus the world was created. This phrase is a direct Latin quote from the final lines of the most common versions of the Emerald Tablet. The entire plot of Dark hinges on these incredibly complex, interconnected time loops, paradoxes, fate, and the idea that events in one time period directly mirror or cause events in another. It's a perfect narrative embodiment of the as above, so below principle applied to the scale of human history and destiny. They even use the tablet's triquetra symbol extensively as their core iconography.
That's a fantastic example. Modern writers recognizing that the tablet's core ideas provide this incredibly dense, powerful structure for telling stories about interconnectedness and cycles. We also see the core maxim, as above, so below, translated into pure visual iconography sometimes, don't we? Like in the tarot.
Absolutely. Just look at the classic magician card in the Rider-Waite tarot deck, probably the most famous deck design.
Yeah, everyone knows that card.
The figure of the magician stands before his altar, where the tools representing the four elements lie. Crucially, one hand points up towards the heavens, while the other hand points down towards the earth. It is the universally recognized visual shorthand for as above, so below. It explicitly embeds the tablet's central philosophical principle right into one of the most recognizable images in modern occult symbolism. It teaches the principle visually without ever needing to mention Hermes or Belinus or Arabic manuscripts.
It becomes an instant symbol. And even in, say, world music, we find direct influence.
Yeah, it pops up in surprising places. The highly respected and innovative Brazilian musician Jorge Ben-Jor released a hugely successful and influential album back in 1974 titled A Tábua de Esmeralda.
The Emerald Tablet album.
Exactly. The album explicitly integrates Hermetic philosophy, alchemical allegory, and esoteric themes directly into Brazilian popular music, samba rock. The song titles and the lyrical content directly invoke figures like Hermes Trismegistus, talk about celestial origins, the philosopher's stone, the wisdom of the ancients. It brought these ideas into a completely different cultural context.
So really, the modern paradox is still the same one we started with, isn't it? The phrase, as above, so below, is now just common parlance. You hear it constantly in self-help books, in spirituality blogs, in modern paganism, in discussions about manifestation techniques or holistic healing. The core, meaning the idea of interconnectedness between different levels of reality, remains remarkably stable and intuitively grasped. But its actual historical source, this specific short text from an 8th or 9th century Arabic treatise, likely penned in the Abbasid Caliphate, has been almost entirely forgotten or ignored by the vast majority of people who use the phrase every single day.
The idea has completely escaped its container. #tag outro. So when you look at the whole picture, the historical reality is really quite complex, isn't it? You have this text, probably anonymous in origin, strategically misattributed to a legendary sage for over 1,000 years.
Yeah, first to Hermes, then sort of implicitly tied to Aristotle.
Right. Yet somehow, despite the murky origins and the mistaken identity, it managed to capture these incredibly fundamental universal ideas about unity, transformation, and correspondence. Ideas that still resonate profoundly today across so many different fields. It really is a stunning testament to the enduring power of concise philosophy, powerful metaphor, and maybe just hitting on an archetypal truth.
It's just remarkably portable and adaptable, isn't it? Whether you come at it like Newton, maybe seeing it as a coded recipe for physical perfection, or like Jung as a psychological guide to achieving individuation, or like a modern spiritual seeker, seeing it as a formula for cosmic unity and manifestation, the core takeaway seems remarkably consistent.
What's that, do you think?
That the key to understanding the whole universe, the glory of the whole world, lies fundamentally in observing the pattern. recognizing how the same fundamental principles repeat themselves across all scales. The macrocosm is reflected in the microcosm, and vice versa. If you understand one, you have a key to understanding the other. And the text itself concludes by saying the work is done. The final line, in many versions, is something like, "That which I have said of the operation of the sun is accomplished and ended." The operation of the sun is often seen as that final perfecting stage, the ultimate refinement that results in achieving that promised glory of the whole world. Right. So if the tablet describes this whole cyclical process, this ascending to heaven, descending back to earth, this constant work of separating the subtle from the gross, and the necessary path to obtaining that ultimate perfection, that operation of the sun, maybe the final thought for you, listening, is to look inward.
Bringing it back to the microcosm.
Exactly. What mundane, everyday cycle in your own life, maybe a daily routine, a creative process, a long-term habit you're trying to change, even the dynamic within a relationship, reflects that same cosmic pattern. That pattern of rising up, falling back, needing refinement, separating what's truly valuable, the subtle, from what's holding you back, the gross. What small process in your own world is maybe just waiting for its own operation of the sun? Waiting for you to apply that same principle sweetly, with great industry, the difficult, diligent, patient work of separation, purification, and integration to achieve your own kind of perfection. Keep digging into those patterns. They might be telling you more than you think.